People often ask me what the hardest mission I ever faced in Cambodia was. They expect me to describe a fierce firefight or a daring assault. But the mission that has stayed with me for more than 40 years began without a single shot. It started with an order that changed only minutes before we crossed into the jungle. I was serving as the deputy leader of a 4-man Vietnamese special operations team. Our assignment sounded simple on paper. Infiltrate Hill 37 under the cover of darkness. Locate an enemy supply point. Destroy it with explosives. And slip back before dawn. We were trained for missions exactly like that. Silence was our greatest weapon. And being seen meant failure. Our team leader, Wah, was the oldest among us. He rarely smiled, but every decision he made was calm and measured. He carried a folded letter from his fiancée inside a waterproof pouch. Whenever someone joked about what he would do after leaving the army, he always answered, "Build a small house and never sleep in another jungle again." Fuck, our explosives specialist, had been a mechanic before joining the military. His hands were rough from years of working with metal, yet he could assemble a demolition charge with incredible precision. Even in complete darkness, the youngest was Tan, barely 20 years old. He kept a faded photograph of his mother tucked inside his shirt and promised he would bring her to see the sea once he returned home. As for me, I carried little besides my combat knife, wire cutters, a worn canteen with several dents, and a pack filled with dried rice, medical bandages, and extra detonators. After years in Cambodia, I had learned not to carry anything that wasn't essential. Every ounce mattered during a long infiltration. Just before sunset, as we finished checking our equipment one last time, a scout hurried into our temporary position. His face told us the news before he spoke. The enemy reinforced Hill 37 this afternoon. He whispered, "New machine gun positions, more patrols. The original supply cache may already be empty." The atmosphere changed instantly. Our mission was no longer about destroying a storage site. Headquarters now needed us to locate the newly established firing positions so the infantry would know exactly what they faced. The task became far more dangerous, yet our team remained the same size. Nobody complained. Wah simply unfolded the map again and traced a new route with his finger. Instead of approaching from the western slope, we would circle through a swamp where the thick vegetation might hide our movement. It meant several extra hours of crawling through mud, but it also gave us a chance to avoid the enemy's newest defensive line. We checked every piece of gear in complete silence. Fuck carefully wrapped the demolition charges in waterproof cloth. Tan sharpened his combat knife against a smooth stone before slipping it back into its sheath. I tested the hinge on my wire cutters one final time, praying they wouldn't make a sound when we reached the first obstacle. Night settled over the Cambodian forest. The air smelled of wet earth, rotting leaves, and rain that had fallen earlier that afternoon. Somewhere deep in the darkness, insects began their endless chorus. It was a sound I had heard thousands of times, yet that night it felt strangely heavier, as if the jungle itself knew Hill 37 would soon become a place where too many young men would never return. Wah looked at each of us, speaking only 4 quiet words. "Stay close, no mistakes." We nodded. Without another sound, our 4 shadows disappeared beneath the towering trees. None of us knew that the hill ahead would burn for 7 straight days, or that the price of completing this mission would follow the survivors for the rest of our lives. We entered the jungle in a single file, with Wah leading, Fuck behind him, Tan in the middle, and me at the rear. That was how we usually moved. The oldest eyes watched the path ahead, and the second pair watched everything we might leave behind. In special operations, a broken branch or a careless footprint could be as dangerous as a rifle shot. The first hour was quiet except for the forest itself. The night insects screamed from every direction. Water dripped from leaves onto our helmets. Somewhere far away, a bird cried once and then went silent. The ground was soft from the afternoon rain. and every step sank into the mud with a slow sucking sound. We moved slower than normal because of the explosives. Fuck carried the main charge in a waterproof wrap pressed tight against his chest. He treated it almost like a sleeping child. Every few minutes, he touched it with one hand. Not because he was afraid, but because he was the kind of man who trusted only what he could feel. By midnight, we reached the first obstacle line. It was not much to look at in the dark, just low wire stretched between states, half hidden by wet grass and dead leaves. But we knew better. Behind simple wire, there could be trip flares, tin cans, sharpened stakes, or mines. Wah raised his fist, and all of us froze. I crawled forward with the wire cutters. The mud was cold against my chest. Leeches clung to my wrists. I could smell rust, wet soil, and the sour odor of old smoke drifting down from Hill 37. I placed the jaws of the cutter around the first strand and squeezed slowly. Too fast, and the wire would snap with a sharp note. Too slow, and my hands would tremble. The first cut made almost no sound. Tan slid beside me and caught the wire before it sprang back. His face was pale under the dark grease, but his hands were steady. That was the thing about Tan. He was young enough to still talk about home every night. But once the mission began, he could become as quiet as stone. It took us nearly 40 minutes to open a gap wide enough for one man at a time. Wah went first, belly flat, rifle pushed ahead of him. Then Fuck, careful not to drag the explosives against the wire. Then Tan. I came last and covered our tracks with a handful of wet leaves. We had only moved another 100 yards when everything changed. From the left slope, we heard footsteps. Not one man, several. Wah lowered himself so close to the ground that he seemed to disappear into it. We followed. A pond pot patrol came down the hill carrying lanterns covered with cloth. The light was weak, but in that darkness, even weak light felt like fire. They stopped less than 20 yards from us. One of them coughed. Another spoke in a low voice. I could not understand every word, but I knew enough to catch the meaning. They were not following their old patrol route. They had shifted the line sometime after sunset. That meant our map was already wrong. For almost 2 hours, we lay without moving. Ants crawled across my neck. My left leg went numb beneath me. Tan's breathing grew uneven, and I touched his boot once with my fingers. Not a signal from any manual. Just a reminder that he was not alone. When the patrol finally moved away, none of us spoke. Wah only turned his head and pointed toward a lower ravine. The western approach was no longer safe. We would have to crawl through the ravine and climb toward Hill 37 from below. It was harder, wetter, and slower. But it kept us alive. Near dawn, we reached a patch of thick brush at the base of the hill. Through the leaves, I saw Hill 37 for the first time. Flares rose above it like white stars. Machine guns blinked along the ridge. The whole slope flashed, faded, and flashed again. That was when I understood why the hill had its name in our memories. Hill 37 was already burning before the battle truly began. By the time the first gray light touched the trees, we were lying inside a patch of thorn brush at the foot of Hill 37. None of us had slept. Our uniforms were soaked through with mud and sweat. My canteen had taken another dent during the crawl through the ravine. But the water inside was still good, and that was all that mattered. Wah signaled for us to eat. Nobody opened a real meal. We only chewed small handfuls of dried rice, letting it soften slowly in our mouths so we would not need much water. That was how we learned to live in the jungle. You did not eat because you were hungry. You ate because your body needed enough strength to crawl one more mile, cut one more wire, or carry one more wounded man. From where we lay, Hill 37 looked different from what our briefing had described. The old map showed one supply cache near the lower western slope and a single firing position above it. But through the leaves, we counted much more than that. There were at least 3 machine gun nests along the ridge. A narrow trench line cut across the face of the hill like a dark scar. Men moved between covered pits with ammunition boxes on their shoulders. Fuck watched them through a small pair of field glasses. He did not speak for a long time. Then he handed the glasses to Wah. They moved the supplies, he whispered. Wah looked for himself. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. The old cache was no longer the heart of the position. The enemy had opened a new ammunition route during the night, running along a dry creek bed behind a line of rocks. It was clever. From above, it would look like nothing. From below, you could miss it unless you were close enough to smell the fresh-cut branches used to cover it. That was our first real turning point. If we followed the original plan and destroyed the old cache, we might make a loud explosion and accomplish very little. The main ammunition line would remain untouched. The new machine guns would still be able to fire down on our infantry when the attack began. But if we moved closer to confirm the new route, we risked exposing the whole team. Wah folded the map carefully and placed it back inside his shirt. He looked at each of us one by one. No speech, no drama, just a silent question. Fuck nodded first. Tan followed. I nodded last, though my mouth had gone dry. We would move closer. That decision sounds simple when told years later. It was not simple then. We were 4 men lying in wet brush, deep behind enemy lines, with no radio contact strong enough to explain what we had found. We were trained to obey the mission. But sometimes the mission changed before your eyes. At that moment, discipline did not mean following the paper plan. It meant understanding what had to be done and accepting the cost. We waited until a cloud covered the morning light. Then we crawled downhill first, away from the target, before cutting sideways through a band of thick grass. Wah wanted to approach from an angle no sentry would expect. Every movement was slow. My elbows sank into black mud. The smell of wet roots and human sweat filled my nose. Somewhere above us, a man laughed, and the sound made my stomach tighten. Tan was close enough that I could see his fingers shaking slightly as he pushed aside a vine. I touched the back of his boot again. The same quiet reminder from the night before. He stopped shaking. After nearly an hour, we reached a fallen tree overlooking the dry creek bed. From there, we saw the truth clearly. Ammunition boxes were being carried into a hidden bunker dug into the hill itself. Beside it stood a newly mounted heavy machine gun, covered with branches but aimed directly toward the valley where our men would have to advance. Hoa's face turned hard. He pointed to the bunker, then to Fuck's explosives, then drew one finger across his own palm. Destroy it. Before we could move, a sentry stepped out from behind the rocks and looked straight toward our hiding place. The sentry stood so still that, for a few seconds, I hoped he had not seen us. He was young, maybe no older than Tan, with a rifle hanging loose across his chest and a scarf wrapped around his neck. His eyes moved slowly over the fallen tree, the grass, the dark space beneath the brush where 4 men were holding their breath. Then his head turned back. That was enough. Wah did not speak. He only pressed 2 fingers into the mud, the signal to stay down. The sentry took 1 step forward, then another. Dry leaves cracked under his sandals. Each sound seemed louder than a gunshot. I felt my hand close around the handle of my knife. In special operations, people imagine courage as something loud. It was never like that for us. Courage was keeping your breathing slow when fear was crawling up your throat. It was waiting 1 more second. Even when every nerve in your body screamed to move. It was knowing that if the sentry shouted, the whole hill would wake up, and our mission would die right there with us. He came within 5 yards. Then 3. Tan shifted his knee by accident. It was only the smallest movement, but a twig snapped beneath him. The sentry froze. His mouth opened. I moved before the sound came out. I crossed the short distance low and fast, my left hand catching his rifle, my right arm locking around him. We fell together into the wet grass. He struggled hard, much stronger than I expected. I remember the smell of sweat and old cloth, the scrape of his rifle stock against my ribs, the terrible closeness of another human being fighting for air. I will not dress that moment up. War sometimes forces men into things they never wanted to carry in memory. We had no time, no room, and no other choice. When it was over, the jungle went quiet again. But it was not the same quiet as before. Tan looked at me from behind the fallen tree. His eyes were wide. He knew his mistake had almost exposed us, and I knew he would punish himself for it long after the mission ended. Wa crawled to my side and checked the slope above us. No alarm, no shouting, no movement from the bunker. For now, we were still ghosts. But we had lost something important. Time. The sentry had not been alone by accident. His footprints showed he had been walking a fresh path between the bunker and a forward listening post. That meant other men could come looking for him soon. Our hiding place was no longer safe, and our window to act had become much smaller. Wa studied the ground, then pointed toward a patch of elephant grass closer to the ammunition route. His meaning was clear. We would not pull back. We would move in tighter. Fuck opened the waterproof wrap around the explosives. His hands were steady, but his face had changed. He understood the new danger better than anyone. To place the charge where it would do real damage, he would have to get within arm's reach of the bunker entrance. Tan leaned close to me and whispered, barely louder than the insects, "I'm sorry, brother." I wanted to tell him it was nothing. I wanted to say every man makes mistakes in the jungle. But the words would have been too easy. And the truth was heavier. A small sound had nearly cost all four of us our lives. So I only touched his shoulder once. That was all I could give him. We began crawling again, slower than before. Above us, Hill 37 kept flashing with distant fire. Below us, our own infantry was still waiting for the signal that would never come unless we finished what we had found. Then, from the bunker, a voice called out. Someone was asking for the missing sentry. The voice from the bunker came again, sharper this time. We froze beneath the elephant grass. I could feel Tan's shoulder pressed against mine, hard and tense. Fuck lay just ahead of us with the wrapped explosive charge under his chest. Wa was closest to the bunker, one hand flat against the mud, his eyes fixed on the entrance. Another Pon Pot soldier stepped out. He looked toward the path where the missing sentry should have returned. He called the man's name once, then listened. No answer. For a moment, the whole hill seemed to hold its breath with us. Wa made a small motion with 2 fingers. Move now. Fuck slid forward first. He did not crawl like a man in a hurry. He moved like a shadow, inch by inch, keeping the explosive charge above the mud. I followed close enough to cover him. Tan stayed behind us, watching the slope. Wa shifted to the right, drawing his knife and keeping his body between us and the bunker entrance. The machine gun was under a cover of branches less than 15 yards away. Its barrel pointed down toward the valley, exactly where our infantry would have to cross when the attack began. Seeing it that close made my stomach tighten. A weapon like that, in the right position, could tear apart a whole line of men before they even reached the first rocks. Fuck reached the side of the bunker and began working. His hands were calm. That is what I remember most. The hill was full of danger. A man was missing. A guard was searching. We were deep inside an enemy position. Yet Fuck handled the charge the way a mechanic handles a familiar engine. He placed it low, where the blast would travel into the ammunition space, then pressed mud and leaves around it to hide the shape. The second soldier walked farther from the bunker. He was getting too close to Wa. I tightened my grip on my rifle, though firing it would mean losing the silence that protected us. Wa glanced at me once and shook his head. Not yet. Fuck finished setting the detonator wire and pulled back, slowly, carefully. Then a flare burst above the ridge. White light poured down over the slope. For one terrible second, I saw everything clearly: the bunker mouth, the ammunition boxes, the cupboard machine gun, Wa crouched beside a rock, Fuck halfway in the open, and Tan's pale face behind the grass. The soldier saw us too. He shouted. Wa moved first, striking him down before the shout became a second breath. But the damage was done. From somewhere higher on the hill, a rifle fired, then another. The quiet broke apart all at once. Now, Wa hissed. Fuck pressed the trigger device. The explosion lifted the ground beneath us. I felt it in my teeth before I heard it. A deep, violent crack slammed into the hillside. The bunker mouth flashed orange. Ammunition inside began to cook off, popping and bursting like angry firecrackers. Only each burst carried death with it. The cupboard machine gun vanished in smoke and flying branches. Hill 37 caught fire. Not like a forest fire, like a wound opening in the dark. Enemy soldiers shouted from above. Tracers cut red lines through the smoke. From the valley below, our own forces answered with rifles and machine guns. The larger battle had begun sooner than planned, dragged awake by the blast we had set. We should have pulled back immediately. That was the rule: strike fast, destroy the target, disappear. But our escape route was already gone. The patrol line below us had shifted again, and gunfire was sweeping the ravine we had used to climb in. If we ran, we would run straight into them. Wa grabbed my sleeve and pointed toward a cluster of rocks higher on the slope. It was not a retreat. It was a hiding place, maybe the only one left. We crawled through smoke and dirt while bullets snapped through the leaves. Tan stumbled once, and I caught his belt before he slid downhill. Fuck's face was blackened from the blast, but he still clutched the empty explosive wrap like he did not realize the charge was gone. At the rocks, we dropped into a shallow depression barely deep enough for 4 men. Below us, the valley flashed with gunfire. Above us, Hill 37 burned and shouted. Wa looked at the destroyed bunker, then at the ridge beyond it. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the battle. We stay, we watch. They need to know what's still up there. No one answered. We all understood. The mission was not finished. And now, neither was Hill 37. At first, I thought we would stay among those rocks for only a few hours. We had destroyed the ammunition bunker. We had seen enough to report the new firing positions. All we needed was one opening to slip back down the ravine and return to our unit. That opening never came. By noon, Hill 37 had become a furnace of smoke, dust, and gunfire. The Pon Pot forces above us kept shifting from trench to trench, trying to hold the ridge. Our infantry below kept pushing forward, then pulling back, then pushing again. Every time the firing slowed, another burst started from a different part of the hill. Wa kept watching through a crack between 2 rocks. He marked each position in his memory the way other men might write on paper. 1 machine gun near the broken tree, 2 rifle pits behind the stones, a mortar team moving under a torn green tarp. He spoke only when necessary, and even then his voice was barely above a breath. We survived the first day on discipline. We survived the second on luck. By the 3rd day, luck began to feel thin. Our dried rice was nearly gone. We divided it into tiny portions, no bigger than what could fit in 2 fingers. My dented canteen had only a few mouthfuls left. We collected rainwater in a piece of poncho when a short storm passed over the hill. But most of it tasted like dirt and smoke. Tan developed a fever during the 2nd night. At first he tried to hide it, but I could hear his teeth clicking in the dark. Malaria had been moving through the units for weeks, and every man in Cambodia knew that sound. I pressed my palm against his forehead. He was burning hotter than the hill. "I'm fine," he whispered. He was not fine. Fuck gave him the last bitter tablets from his small medical pouch. Then he leaned back against the rock and closed his eyes, as if giving away medicine was no different from passing a cup of tea. That was Fuck's way. He did not make speeches. He just did what needed doing. During the day, we dug shallow scrapes with our knives and hands, deep enough to hide our bodies from patrols but not deep enough to protect us from artillery. At night, we shifted a few yards at a time so the enemy would not fix our location. We slept in pieces, 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there, always with one man awake. Sometimes, in the middle of all that noise, silence would fall for a few seconds. Those were the hardest moments. When the guns stopped, you could hear the wounded calling from somewhere down the slope. You could hear leaves burning. You could hear insects returning, as if the jungle did not care who lived or died on that hill. In those pauses, I thought of home, of cooked rice, of clean water, of my mother's courtyard after rain. Then the shooting would start again, and I would become a soldier once more. On the 5th night, Wah crawled back from the edge of our position with mud across his face and a look I did not like. "They're setting another gun," he whispered. We followed his hand toward the upper ridge. Through smoke and drifting ash, I saw movement near a narrow notch in the hill. Men were dragging a heavy machine gun into place, aiming it not at us, but down into the valley where our infantry had been gathering for another push. If that gun opened fire at dawn, many of our men would never reach the slope. Fuck stared at it for a long moment. Then he checked the small amount of explosive we had left. Nobody asked what he was thinking. We all knew. Hill 37 had already taken more than any hill was worth. But war does not stop because men are tired, hungry, or afraid. Sometimes it asks for one more crawl through the dark, one more impossible choice, one more debt paid by the living and the dead. Wah looked at us and said quietly, "Tonight." That night, the jungle did not feel dark enough. The ridge above us kept flashing with gunfire, and every burst of light showed the path we had to cross. It was no more than 30 yards of open ground between our rocks and the notch where the new machine gun was being set up. 30 yards sounds short to a man walking down a street. On Hill 37, under enemy eyes, it felt like crossing an ocean. Fuck checked the last explosive charge again. It was smaller than what we wanted, but enough if placed close to the weapon. He tucked the detonator wire inside his shirt and looked at Wah. "I'll go," he whispered. Wah shook his head. "You said it. I carry it." Fuck's jaw tightened. "That's not how we work." Wah looked at him for a long second. "Tonight it is." No one spoke after that. I understood why Wah made the decision. Fuck had the steadiest hands, but he had also been coughing blood since the afternoon. The blast from the first bunker had hit him harder than he admitted. Tan was still feverish, though he kept his rifle pointed toward the slope like a man trying to hold himself together by force. That left Wah and me. I wanted to say I would go, but Wah was already wrapping the charge against his chest. Before moving out, he pulled the small waterproof pouch from inside his shirt and handed it to me. Inside was the letter from his fiancée, worn soft at the folds. "If I drop it, pick it up," he said. I tried to hand it back. "You'll carry it home yourself." He gave me a tired smile, the first I had seen from him in days. "Then keep it dry for me until morning." That was all. Wah slid out first, belly flat against the ground. I followed 10 feet behind, covering him. Fuck stayed at the rocks with the detonator line. Tan watched our rear. The plan was simple. Wah would place the charge at the side of the gun position, crawl back, and Fuck would fire it when we were clear. Simple plans are often the cruelest ones. Halfway across, Wah stopped. A flare rose from behind the ridge. White light spilled over everything. I froze with my face in the dirt. Wah was caught in the open. One arm extended. The explosive charge pressed beneath him. The enemy gun crew saw movement. Someone shouted. A rifle cracked. Then the whole notch erupted. Bullets cut through the grass around Wah. He did not run. He crawled forward. That was the moment I faced the choice that has never left me. If I rushed to him, I might drag him back. I might also expose Fuck, Tan, and the detonator line. The machine gun would survive, and by morning it would tear into our infantry below. If I stayed down and covered him, Wah might still finish the mission, but I would be watching my friend crawl into fire. I remember pressing my cheek into the wet earth. I remember my hands shaking around my rifle. I remember hating the war, hating the hill, hating the fact that duty could ask a man to love his comrades and still not save them. Wah reached the gun position. He pushed the charge against the base of the weapon, wedging it under a stack of ammunition boxes. Then he turned his head toward me. Even through smoke and darkness, I saw him raise one hand. Not for help. For the signal. I fired toward the muzzle flashes. Not because I thought I could stop them all, but because it was the only shield I could give him. Behind me, Fuck understood. The detonator clicked. The explosion tore the notch open. The machine gun flipped backward in a burst of flame and splintered wood. Men shouted. Ammunition cracked. For a few seconds, the ridge went blind with smoke. I ran then. I found Wah beside the broken rocks. He was still alive, but the fire had already taken too much from him. He gripped my sleeve and pulled me close. Did it stop? He asked. I looked toward the valley. The gun was silent. Yes, I said. It stopped. He closed his eyes as if that answer was enough. I told Wah the gun had stopped, and for a moment his face became peaceful. Not happy. No man looked happy on Hill 37. But peaceful, as if the terrible weight he had carried for 7 days had finally slipped from his shoulders. Then his hand loosened on my sleeve. I called his name once. He did not answer. There was no time to mourn properly. That is one of the cruelest things about war. It takes a man from you, then gives you only seconds to accept it before demanding your next decision. The ridge was still alive with shouting. Enemy soldiers were moving toward the broken machine gun position. Smoke rolled across the rocks, thick enough to hide us for a little while, but not long. I pulled Hoa's letter pouch from inside my shirt and tucked it into his hand. I wanted him to keep it. I wanted something of home to stay with him. But Fuck grabbed my wrist and shook his head. His family, he whispered. He was right. So I took the pouch back and placed it inside my own shirt. Against my skin. Tan crawled up beside us, fever still shining in his eyes. When he saw Wah, he stopped moving. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Only a few days earlier, he had been the youngest in our team, always asking about the sea, always talking about taking his mother there someday. On that ridge, in that smoke, I saw something young leave his face forever. We have to go, Fuck said. He tried to stand and collapsed immediately. That was when I saw the blood on his side. A piece of metal from the blast had torn through his lower ribs. He had hidden it during the explosion, hidden it while setting the detonator, hidden it even when Wah was dying in front of us. I pressed a bandage hard against the wound. Fuck gritted his teeth but made no sound. That was his discipline, and perhaps also his pride. He had always been quiet, but now his silence frightened me. Our mission was complete. The bunker was gone. The first machine gun was gone. The second gun had been destroyed before it could cut down our infantry. But the cost had become too heavy to carry in words. We made a sling from a torn piece of poncho and one strip of Hoa's webbing. Tan took Fuck under one arm. I took the other. We could not carry Hoa's body. I still feel the shame of writing that, even now, but if we tried, all of us would have stayed on Hill 37. Before leaving, I took Hoa's knife and placed it under a flat stone near his hand. It was not a ceremony. It was only what I could do. We moved downslope through smoke, branches, and broken earth. Every few yards, we stopped and listened. The Pon Pot soldiers were searching the upper ridge first, thinking we had fled higher. That mistake gave us a narrow chance. Fuck drifted in and out of consciousness. Once, he looked at me and tried to smile. "Did the charge work clean?" he asked. "Clean enough," I said. He nodded, satisfied, as if nothing else mattered. Near the lower ravine, the gunfire behind us began to fade. Dawn was coming again, pale and dirty through the trees. 7 days earlier, we had crawled into Hill 37 as 4 men with a mission. Now we were 3 shadows dragging one another through the mud, carrying a letter, an empty explosive wrap, and a silence none of us knew how to break. At the edge of the ravine, Fuck pressed something cold into my palm. It was his wire cutter, the same one he had used for years, its jaws worn dull and blackened by smoke. "Keep it," he whispered. Then his eyes closed. Fuck's eyes closed, but he was still breathing. I pressed 2 fingers against his neck and felt a weak pulse beating under the skin. Tan looked at me, waiting for the truth. I nodded once. Alive, for now. We could not stop there. The lower ravine was filling with smoke from the fighting above, and the morning light was beginning to expose every broken branch and muddy footprint. If the Pon Pot patrols came down from the ridge, they would find us before we reached our lines. We had no more explosives, almost no water, 1 man dead on the hill behind us, 1 man bleeding between us, and Tan still shook with fever. I put Fuck's wire cutter into my pocket and took most of his weight over my shoulder. "Stay on my left," I told Tan. "If I fall, pull him forward." Tan nodded, but his face was gray. He looked like a boy trying to carry the body of an older man inside his own skin. Still, he did not complain, not once. We moved through the ravine step by step, sometimes walking, sometimes crawling. The mud sucked at our boots. Thorn vines tore our sleeves. Twice, we had to lie flat while enemy soldiers passed above us on the slope. I could hear them talking, angry and confused, still searching for the men who had destroyed their gun. Fuck woke once near a bend in the creek bed. "Water," he whispered. My canteen was nearly empty. I gave him 1 small mouthful and kept the last for Tan. That is another thing war teaches you. Kindness becomes measured in drops. A man can love his brothers and still count every swallow. By late afternoon, the sound of battle had shifted behind us. Hill 37 was still firing, still burning, but the worst of it had moved toward the ridge. Our infantry had advanced farther than before. We knew it by the direction of the gunfire, by the answering shouts, by the way the enemy bullets no longer swept the lower valley as heavily. The destroyed machine gun had mattered. That should have comforted me. It did not. Every few steps, I felt Hoa's letter pouch against my chest. It seemed heavier than my rifle. I thought of the small house he had wanted to build. I thought of the woman waiting for a letter that would never come in his own handwriting. I thought of how, on a map, Hill 37 was just a number. On the ground, it was mud, blood, smoke, and names. Near dusk, we reached the first Vietnamese listening post. A young soldier rose from behind a camouflaged pit and almost fired before he recognized our uniforms. His eyes widened when he saw Fuck hanging between us. "Special Operations Team," I said, though my voice sounded strange to me. "We're coming in." Hands pulled us down into the position. Someone took my rifle. Someone else cut open Fuck's shirt and began working on the wound. Tan collapsed beside a sandbag wall, shaking so hard the medic had to hold his shoulders. An officer came running and asked for our report. I wanted to sleep. I wanted to wash the mud from my face. I wanted to say Hoa's name and let someone else carry the rest. But we had gone into Hill 37 for a reason, and men were still fighting because of what we had seen. So I gave the report. I described the destroyed bunker, the first gun, the second gun, the trench line, the mortar pit, the path they used to move ammunition. I spoke until my throat burned. The officer wrote everything down without interrupting. Only when I finished did he ask, "Where is your team leader?" I could not answer right away. Tan turned his face away. Fuck, half conscious on the stretcher. Opened his eyes just enough to whisper. Wah finished it. No one said anything after that. That night, under a torn shelter near the rear line, I opened my hand and looked at Fuck's blackened wire cutter. Its jaws were dull, scarred, and stained with smoke from Hill 37. I held it while the medics worked nearby, while stretchers came and went, while names were called and some men did not answer. We had returned. But not all of us had come home. More than 40 years have passed since Hill 37. But some nights I still wake up with the smell of wet earth in my nose. My house is quiet now. There are no rifles stacked by the wall. No damp poncho over my shoulders. No distant machine gun cutting through the dark. Still, when rain falls hard on the roof, I sometimes hear that hill again. I keep Fuck's wire cutter in a small wooden box. It is an ugly thing to anyone else. The handles are scratched, the jaws are worn dull, one side is blackened from smoke, and the hinge no longer opens smoothly. My grandchildren once asked why I kept a broken tool instead of a medal. I told them because medals remember the victory, but this remembers the men. Fuck survived Hill 37, though he was never the same. The shrapnel damaged his lung, and after the war he returned to his village with a cough that stayed with him for the rest of his life. He opened a small repair shop, just as he once said he would. When I visited him years later, he still worked with machines, but slowly, carefully, stopping often to breathe. He never talked much about the hill. Men like Fuck did not need many words. His silence already carried enough. Tan also came home. The fever nearly took him, but he lived. Years later, he sent me a photograph. In it, he stood beside his mother on a beach, the ocean bright behind them. He had kept his promise. I looked at that picture for a long time. It made me happy, but it also hurt, because Wah should have seen something like that too. Wah never built his small house. After the campaign, I carried his letter pouch back through many hands until it reached his family. I did not meet his fiancée. Maybe that was for the best. I would not have known what to say to her. How do you tell someone that the man they loved died asking whether a machine gun had stopped firing? How do you explain that his last concern was not himself, but the soldiers below him whom he could not even see? People sometimes want war stories to end cleanly. They want bravery to balance the loss, victory to explain the dead, and time to soften what happened. But war does not work that way. Hill 37 was taken. The enemy position was broken. Our mission helped save men in the valley. All of that is true. It is also true that the price was too high. When I hold that wire cutter, I remember crawling through mud with Tan's feverish breathing beside me. I remember Fuck's calm hand setting explosives in the dark. I remember Hoa's quiet voice saying, "Stay close, no mistakes." I remember the 7 days when a nameless hill became a place that divided my life into before and after. I have lived many peaceful years since then. I have eaten hot meals, slept under a dry roof, watched children grow, and listened to rain without having to reach for a weapon. Those are simple things, but a soldier who has survived long enough understands that simple things are never small. The wooden box stays in my room. Inside it are Fuck's wire cutter, a scrap of old map, and a small note with 3 names written by my own hand: Wah, Fuck, Tan. 1 is gone, 2 came home change, and I remain here to remember all of them. That is the real weight of Hill 37. Not the fire, not the explosions, not even the mission. The real weight is carrying your brothers forward when they can no longer walk beside you.